So Mike, let's start with you. As a publisher, over 200 brands, obviously publishers rely on lots of systems that historically have used and use today third-party cookies. What does a post-third-party cookie future look like for you?
Well, you know what they say: never waste a good crisis, right? So we're, I think we're approaching it probably very similarly to some other publishers, right? On the one hand, what is the problem we're trying to solve? So without the third-party cookie, how do we help our marketers and our advertisers understand measurement and attribution and how things work? And how do we do that in a very sort of consumer and privacy-focused environment, right? I think as a company, we look at content is still a big deal, right? Content is king for us, and as a company, we produce content, and first and foremost, we want to develop a very strong relationship with our readers, our consumers, and within that, that gives us the ability to work with our marketers and advertisers to provide a good platform. For us, I think again, one of the things that we do have to figure out and work hand in hand with the ecosystem and the advertiser, the marketer, is how do we really figure out measurement across different publishers, right?
So, I mean, that is so fundamental. As we've heard from conversations earlier in today's conference, everyone needs to be focused on a range of different approaches: new authenticated ID solutions, probabilistic approaches, cohorts, contextual. But regardless of what system you're using for example, for addressability, you still need to measure outcomes, and that will require working with across other publishers, working with advertisers. Where are those conversations at? Do you feel that everyone's at sort of the same place, or are you seeing differences in the market's readiness? Yeah,
I mean, I think as a publisher, I feel we probably have a little bit of a higher sense of urgency, right? I mean, our business is built on in ensuring that our sites and properties work well both with the consumer and the advertiser. So it's implicit on us to develop the solution. I think as we chat with advertisers and marketers, although probably this past week I've probably seen a little bit more flurry of inbound calls asking questions. I think it's still sort of a matter of I think education on the marketer side. I think on the publisher, at least here at Future, we have our plan. We're working on a few things, across both testing different third-party providers, as well as ramping up our own first-party identity and first-party segments, as well as just getting more creative on the first-party side, right? And really, I think people forget that we're doing business every day already and providing value in a first-party basis. So we're also shoring up on how do we bring creative solutions to the marketplace. But that being said, back to your question, I think publishers probably have a little bit of a higher sense of urgency now. And what we're trying to do as a publisher is work closely with our marketers and advertisers to answer questions and help guide.
Thank you. So Jen, Mike feels that maybe publishers are a little further ahead or have a greater sense of urgency than advertisers. You work with lots of advertisers. How are you advising your clients in sort of preparing for this new world?
Yeah, so I think Mike brings up a phenomenal point. We've got measurement, and then we've got the addressability and targeting. And those are the two key things that we really need to solve for. And you almost can't have one without the other. I think where we're focusing with our clients is to really initially start with an audit, right? How much of your targeting today relies on third-party cookie, and how much of that, may not be available in the future? That date is still, the distant-ish future at this point. If you have 70% of your targeting amassed leveraging cookies, you're in a very different predicament than a brand or an advertiser that only has 30%. So the first thing we're suggesting is really understanding, what you're doing and how you're doing it. The second thing is identifying where you can lean into some of the cookieless piloting. We all know that this is a reality. And so we need to start gaining as much learning as we can when we have measurement available. And when we have some of these things that are still very tangible today. We're seeing contextual continue to come up with clients. Certainly, I hope that would be music to Mike's ears as he's thinking about, relevance is going to be important again. It isn't exclusively going to be about audience for this, in the sake of relevance. And then thirdly, and I suspect many of our clients are in different, spaces when it comes to this as well, but how are you leveraging your first party data and what is your future-proof solution to be able to continue to leverage that information? Here at Dentsu, we have our Mercury product, which really helps to supercharge first-party data. And we're very hopeful that all of the brands and advertisers listening today are thinking about what that supercharged capability is going to be for them.
Thank you, Jen. I actually want to come back to that in just a moment. But first of all, Shiv, you work with lots of companies across the ecosystem. What are you hearing from them in terms of identity and consent and a future without third-party cookies?
Yeah, so what I was going to say to you maybe a week and a half ago is probably very different than what I'm going to say to you now. I had some things prepared, Konrad, to say, and they got all thrown out the window by Google. So I mean, I think what's interesting, right, is and you mentioned this at the outset, Konrad. We are in a major kind of state of change in this industry, right? With everything going on around data privacy regulation, obviously consumer choice, et cetera. And so what's interesting about, specific to identity and how we're trying to solve for identity is I think, pre-Google's announcement last week, I think the industry was kind of getting comfortable with where we were headed. I think the industry was like, okay, well, I think we're starting to understand this. We've got Project Rearc over here, and then we've got some cookieless kind of ID solutions maybe sitting on top of that with, using email as identifiers or addresses or what have you. And those will be great alternatives for the future. And then, we've got Google on this other side, and they're working on privacy sandbox initiatives, cohort level targeting, et cetera. And I'm getting comfortable with that. Like I kind of am starting to organize myself a little bit around that reality. And then Google comes out with this announcement last week and says, don't get too comfortable, guys, right? And Google basically says, takes a not so thinly veiled shot at those cookieless solutions and basically says, we don't think they meet privacy standards. Now, before all of this, we had uncertainty, right? But I think we were getting a little bit more comfortable with where we were headed and starting to solve for that kind of reality that we thought we were headed towards. Now I think we have a lot more a lot more uncertainty than we did a week and a half ago, right? And so that's crazy, right? We don't know where we're headed anymore. We don't know what Google's going to do around these kind of cookieless solutions that other companies are building. We don't know if they're going to use Chrome to kind of shut those down. We don't know what the government's going to do, right? The government's investigating Google for antitrust. Are they going to kind of bring this into the scope of that investigation? We don't know how privacy advocates are going to respond to Google bringing these cookieless solutions into the limelight. And, for Jen and for Mike, like I'm fascinated to hear from you guys. How are advertisers and publishers reacting to what Google said, right? And so to me, like the long story short here, Konrad, is what we're seeing right now, especially off the heels of this announcement last week, is we have even more uncertainty than we did before. And uncertainty to me means a few things. And this is what we're talking to some of our customers about. Uncertainty means you have to think about risk, right? Uncertainty equals risk, and risk means you have to diversify, right? Your set of solutions and what you're testing. Diversification is critical to hedge risk. And so, to your point that you made earlier, Konrad, we're going to see more solutions before we see fewer because there is an appetite for diversification. We don't know what's going to work and what's going to persist in the future. And so we need to kind of diversify as an industry to figure out what's going to stick and what's not. The second thing I think we're going to need, and this ties back to diversification, is contingency plans, right? So, okay, well, I'm going to use these things and I like these things, but if these things don't work because the government shuts it down or Chrome shuts it down, I got to have a backup, right? So what's my backup when it comes to identity and measurement and targeting and all of these things? And then last but not least, and this is where I always kind of lean in, Konrad, you know this. I think it's about education, right? I think we have to always kind of, as an industry, make sure we know exactly what's going on, right? What does Google's announcement mean? What is the latest with IAB's rearc, right? How is the government looking at all this stuff? If we could stay on the cutting edge of what's happening in this industry, we can do a better job of diversification. We can do a better job with our contingency plans because we're actually educated about the various machinations of all these different mechanisms and technologies that exist out there.
Yeah, I think that's right. Obviously, there'll be a lot of new news as we work through this, and staying abreast of what's going on and what the implications of that are is going to be important for everyone. So I like the questions that you asked there, Shiv, and I'll get to them in a moment. I just want to remind our audience that you can also ask questions via the chat. So let's go with Shiv's question. I'll go to you first, Mike, on that one. What are you taking as the implications of Google's announcements last week? What difference is that making to you? Has it changed any of your plans?
Yeah, I don't and again, coming at this from a publisher, I don't think it's really changed any of our plans, right? To what Shiv was saying, I don't think there's going to be a one size fits all, right? So we're still, we're committed to testing with a number of different providers, and we're in the process of doing that today. We're keeping Google close, right? So, Google's so big that we're working with them in a lot of different ways, even before the announcement about this. And we're going to continue to do that, right? And do the same thing with other large partners. And I think probably the only thing that's probably changed is it's probably given us an even greater sense of urgency, Konrad. I think it's probably, one or two probably are the initiatives of what we're working on today, right? And I think, when you look at sort of the streams that we're working on, certainly we're, testing third-party solutions, keeping Google close, but at the same time, we're doing more of what we do well. We've hired, I think we've got another 125 openings for folks on our edit team. So we're going to produce more content, right? I think, we do content really well. We're going to produce more content. I think the other piece that we do really well is 75, 80% of our traffic is organic. So we're going to continue to do that, right? If we produce good content, we're going to drive, high intent traffic, which, we feel is going to be valuable for the advertisers today and tomorrow. I think that the question is going to be, okay, how do we make sure that's available in an easy way so that the advertiser can sort of, fit that into their media plan, into their mix. Mm-hmm. So they understand how that's working across their entire plan, right? As opposed to, all of these mini walled gardens. I think that, to me, I fundamentally believe in the open web, and that, we have to make it easy for the consumer and the advertiser. To go where they want to go and have choice and do it in a privacy focused way.
Yeah, I think this is an opportunity to work on that. I do think that, one of the inevitable consequences of the sort of the shift in the identity mechanisms is going to be a consolidation of some of the pieces of the stack, which hopefully can actually make it a little bit easier. I like the point you raised there. Sort of the news just sort of, reaffirmed the priority level of this work. I think that's a good point. I think there was a number of people speculating that maybe Google wouldn't make the changes so soon. Maybe they'd give people longer time. And I think this is sort of reaffirmed that no, they're moving ahead with their plans. They're sort of clarifying the detail of that. I don't know. There's so much new news here. Really, I think it's clear now there'll be some level of bifurcation, and different systems are going to be supported in different places, and that creates even more complexity for everyone dealing with it. Jen, any change in your plans from the news last week?
I think it's a lot of what you guys have already mentioned. I think we anticipated some of this, and we knew that there was likely to be clarity. It's helpful to have clarity, but I still do feel like the open web is going to need to be a place that we continue to support. And so while we're faced with perhaps some, let's consider them opportunities to shore up the way in which we can, still support and still have addressability within that space. I don't think that this, quickly becomes a huge opportunity for those walled gardens to continue to grab more share. my hope is that we can continue to create these solutions that will avoid, clients having knee-jerk reactions to just pushing exclusively into those walled gardens.
Absolutely, I think that's important. That's important for everyone. So Jen, earlier on, you discussed sort of first-party data, and you're advising your clients to do a bit of an audit in terms of how reliant they are on data and systems that's dependent on third-party cookies. And of course, the corollary of that is looking at sort of first-party data. Of course, you work with a very diverse range of marketers that have sort of broad differences in terms of their first-party data assets. Given that they have such different starting points, what are the implications for those businesses, and how might different types of businesses think about the future differently? Yeah.
So first of all, first-party data is going to be the biggest asset anyone can harness and leverage to their, benefit moving forward. I think what's going to be really crucial is how portable that information is, and how that information can be transported moving forward. It's going to be incredibly important that you have flexible solutions. I think Shiv did a very good job of describing how it's important to have plan A, plan B, plan C for how you can create value moving forward. And I think, across a wide variety, there are certain clients that are still trying to harness what are my assets and how do I leverage them well. I think we're going to see DMPs continue to be a little bit less relevant moving forward until we can start to see perhaps a different currency being transacted in that space. I think those are all the things that I sort of see on the horizon and that are trending.
You mentioned their sort of flexibility and the ability to transport, and I think tied up in all of this, of course, is the need to have more active conversations with consumers so they understand which data is being captured, and how that data is being used and what their choices are. And of course, in some parts of the world now we have regulations that require this, and we're seeing we're seeing obviously state level introduction in the US, and hopefully we will get to federal privacy legislation so we can deal with a single set of rules rather than 50 of them. Mike, you have over 200 publications, you have audiences all around the world. How are you dealing with the consent issue at Future?
Well, as a company, we're headquartered in London, and so we've been involved with GDPR and privacy for many years now. I mean, as a company, we've actually been around for 50 years. We got our start as a magazine publisher, but we're all of our sites are compliant, and we've got a lot of experience around this. To your point, Konrad, I do believe a lot of those regulations are gonna, we already have CCPA here in the United States, in California. I think it's going to go cut across the states and will probably become federal relatively soon. That's my guess. And for us, I think we're relatively well prepared for it, because we've already been, that's already, being in Europe, that's already been sort of top of our list to work on, and we're gonna continue to do that and keep our eye on it.
Yeah, I think in general, my take in Europe, and Europe in particular, publishers have broadly adopted consent management solutions.
Yep.
Advertisers seem to be a little further behind, and I think that's it comes down to where enforcement is at. And the truth is, you are introducing consumer friction, and that increases bounce rates. Mm-hmm. And so I think that's going to be a really interesting trend in terms of as we introduce these new ID mechanisms and need consent, there's going to be this sort of trade-off in terms of added friction. And, there's this balancing act right now between, okay, well, we still get to use third-party cookies so I can monetize that traffic. So it's sort of monetizing, what is the diminishing section. But at the same time, you need to be experimenting, and we've heard that a number of times, to learn about what you can do moving forward. I think that's going to be a really interesting balancing act. Mm-hmm. With pros and cons, you go too early and lose too much revenue now. Well, but at the same time, you don't get everything together. You could be challenged going forward. Shiv, what are you seeing in terms of the level of testing and experimentation, and any sort of advice from what you've seen amongst your clients in the market?
Yeah, I think, we are an industry, unfortunately, of inertia, in my opinion. We like to kind of do what we've always done and assume the worst won't happen. And, we'll just keep going about our days. And so, honestly, I don't think I'm seeing enough testing out there. I think, and to my point earlier, like, I don't think, honestly, a lot of people really understand what's going on a lot of times with Privacy Sandbox, with, Unified ID 2.0. And there's a lot of confusion, frankly, right? So I think that the industry needs to do more. We need to do better, and we need to be more aggressive about testing. I think marketers, vendors, publishers, everybody that kind of tries to get ahead of that puck will benefit from that approach. But frankly, I'm just not seeing enough. I will say one thing that's very promising to me, and I heard this theme come up in both what you said, Jen, and Mike, which is like, we're hoping, right, for a world in which the open web can be healthy and survive and do really well. And we think it can happen. We hope for it. And I'm a glass half full guy. So I'm going to give you like my kind of glass half full on that point, which is, I think in the past, right, we've had an environment where you have the walled gardens, right? And then you've got a very fragmented open web, right? And you've got these walled gardens, and they're competing against a divided kind of fragmented open web of just very small individual players. And we all know how it goes when you have a big behemoth fighting against a divided kind of group. It's very hard for that divided group to succeed, right? And I think what's promising to me, in what we've seen with the identity space in the last, let's say, year or so, is that ever since Google made that announcement about removing third-party cookies, the industry's really come together, right? Like, I think 2 years ago, 3 years ago, everyone kind of agreed, yeah, we need some ID thing. Let's work on this consortium or whatever it might be. No one actually put much behind it. And I think in the last year, we're seeing a lot of effort, right, from the industry, the open web, kind of go behind some of these solutions, right? So Unified ID 2.0, obviously, even with what the IAB is working on with ReArc, with ID5, I think we're seeing a lot of momentum, right? And I think, my takeaway from that, my glass half full take is, I think conventional wisdom says, oh, in the future, with all this data privacy stuff, the walled gardens walls go up higher and it's harder for the open internet, right? So more spend goes into the walled gardens. It's just easier for everybody, right? I think that's the glass half empty. I think the glass half full is the industry's coming together. The open web is finally coming together around some of these solutions. So as a united web, right, I think the united web can be more of a viable alternative and a solution, using some of these ID solutions like, again, Unified ID 2.0, ReArc, et cetera. We can be stronger in providing healthy competition against some of the walled gardens, right? So that's kind of my glass half full of I think there's a world or a reality where there's actually more balance in the space because of that kind of collective approach.
So we've touched on this a little bit, and I think that when you speak, if we were to go to all the attendees at this conference and ask them about sort of the long-term trends that are most concerning to them, I think when you speak to advertisers or agencies or publishers or technology vendors, one of the things that comes up near the top of the list or at the top of the list is the increasing concentration of spend into a limited number of sort of tech giants and what the implications are for that longer term on the open internet. And, Jen, you're responsible for helping your customers spend their money as effectively as they can. It's one thing to aspire to change in how that money's spent, but there's another thing to sort of practically do it. And of course, your customers have to deliver results and present quarterly numbers to Wall Street and so on. What would it take for that shift in spend to reverse? So that funds started to be distributed more sort of equitably in terms of where original content is being created and where people are spending their time. What does it take to be able to start redirecting funds to the open internet?
So I think, to Shiv's point, we have to start seeing some cooperation and sort of collaboration across the open internet as a whole. Without that, it's going to be very hard to build sustainable, wide-reaching solutions that are going to allow for continued support. I will also say that I think we might be discounting, consumers and their willingness to share and allow for, a more personalized web experience. I know from my experience, I would much rather have personalized ads than non-personalized. And so I think, just as we have seen in Europe, once we start to roll out all of these consent mechanisms that are going to allow for perhaps either shared IDs or some, mechanism that's going to allow that to be more persistent without a cookie, I think we will start to see, continued spend trending. I think the other thing that Mike mentioned, and that's incredibly important, and let's not forget, is that content is king. Where content is being created that consumers want to consume, we are going to continue to see, a trend towards embracing that. So where we continue to have, compelling news writing and, fantastic journalism, those spaces will continue to command eyeballs, and eyeballs equal dollars.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think we do the technology infrastructure to support it, to make it cost effective to buy those audiences wherever they are, I think is obviously critically important. And to your point in terms of engaging the consumers, I do think that we need to have a more, so first of all, completely agree that, the industry has to be sort of united in how we approach this. And I think we should also be united in terms of reminding consumers that advertising doesn't have to suck, right? Advertising can offer serendipity. It can bring you things that are useful. But I think, it's sort of the internet's original sin was allowing everyone to believe that all of this fantastic content that you could access anytime from anywhere was free. And of course, it's not free. Creators have to produce that, and it costs a lot of money to produce good content. And of course, it's all primarily funded by advertising. And I do think that there's an opportunity to have a conversation about that. Not participating in ID mechanisms, not allowing data to be used in a protected way that you understand and you consent to, doesn't mean you don't get any advertising. It just means you get more advertising that's not as useful and not as relevant. And, for all of you on the panel, it's not something that I don't think our industry has ever really tackled. What are the ways we can better communicate the value of advertising to consumers, both directly and indirectly? Who wants to take that?
I'll jump in real quick. So I think there's been kind of like a mass, this sounds terrible, a mass brainwashing campaign. I don't know exactly where it originated. We could all, make some guesses, but I think there has been kind of this mass campaign in our public discourse to basically make people, the average user consumer, kind of believe that data privacy infringement equals targeted advertising. And that's not reality, right? Like that's not what it is, right? Data privacy infringement means, is there a way for a company, a technology, a fraudster to figure out your specific identity and then be able to use it in a nefarious way, right? And that's what it means, right? And so I think we almost have to do like the opposite campaign somehow, right? Of like educating consumers that, listen, targeted advertising can be a positive thing when it's funding your experiences, giving you free content, et cetera. And you don't have to just think of it as this thing that invades your privacy and does bad things to you, right? Steals your identity or whatever it might be. It can be just a positive thing. And really the things that make you vulnerable to your identity being stolen are these other things, right? So it's when your PII is being used in these ways, right? Or it's when you get multiple sources of data that can then be matched and reverse engineered, right, to figure out where you live and who you are, right? And so I think there has to probably be some education done across the general public. Right now, we've got like Netflix running around creating documentaries, scaremongering everybody. I forget, there's that documentary that's freaking everybody out. And that's not helping, right? That's not helping the cause. So how do we create like does anybody have like a friend at Netflix? Can we create the opposite documentary or something? I think we need to do some public education,
We should probably work with media companies that the vast majority of media companies rely on advertising for their revenue. And there will always be these exceptions. And, I think obviously, many of us at this conference are fortunate that we can afford to subscribe to services, but we shouldn't forget, the majority of the people who benefit from the internet around the world, the open internet, 5 billion people, aren't in a position to pay for lots or even single
That's right.
Subscriptions.
And Konrad, to that point, right? We don't want advertising to become a tax on the poor, right? Like that, if we put up a bunch of paywalls and say you got to pay for this stuff now, and the affluent people can pay for it, and the not so affluent people can't, well, all of a sudden that's more of a burden on people that don't have money, right? In terms of their attention, their time spent versus the affluent. It's making that wealth gap that we already have an issue with even wider, right? So we don't want advertising to become that.
Yeah, there's lots of underserved communities that will be served less without access to content, information, and so on. So we've got just a few minutes left. What haven't we spoken about that we should? I'm going to switch the roles here and let our panelists ask a question.
Hey, Mike, how do you feel about registration walls and paywalls and all that good stuff, given the new world?
Yeah, well, I think, look, I think, again, I think that it depends on the content and what you're trying to do. I think for us, we focus on, a lot of our sort of specialist content focuses on commerce content, right? Meaning that, we help people find what they're looking for, find what they're passionate about. And if we, put paywalls there, to Konrad's point earlier, it's just, one more hurdle to leap in order to get to the content or the thing that you're looking for. That being said, we have a number of different properties, and that's certainly part of what we're testing. But we have to do that. It's certainly not out of the question for us, but because of our model and because of how we currently have a pretty good trust with our readership, we have to think about that a little bit differently than other publishers, I think.
It's an interesting point there, Mike. And paywalls or registration walls, we're obviously seeing more of them pop up. We're going to see more of them. Mm-hmm. So far, registration levels tend to be quite small. So I think simplifying the consumer experience across the internet is going to be an important part of that becoming a scalable solution. It will never be perfect, and that's why I'm a firm believer that that sort of probabilistic mechanisms for attribution, for addressability, for planning, for insights are going to be just as important as deterministic ones in terms of providing scale over time. Well, we are reaching the end of our period. I want to thank our panelists, Jen, Mike, and Shiv, for joining us and sharing your perspective and wisdom with the audience today. Thanks so much, everyone. Enjoy the rest of the conference.
Great. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, everyone.